Please be seated. God, I present myself today to be used as your instrument, as a vessel. I ask that you remove me from myself and replace myself with the movement of your Holy Spirit within. Anoint the ears of those who will hear a message today, that the message they hear would be one that you have for them specifically today on their faith journey. Amen. Zero tolerance. Jesus, in case you didn't figure out from the reading of the gospel, was not a believer in zero tolerance. The rules and regulations, laws, and everything that was already set out were there. Jesus didn't say, I have to have zero tolerance and no leniency. But Jesus showed by the healing of that child of the synagogue leader, by the pouring out of his healing power from the simple garments to the woman with the hemorrhage, that his zero tolerance was to not tolerate what society had to tell him he had to do. I want to read to you a letter that Roy and I signed this week. It's a call for immigration justice to President Donald J. Trump and the people of the United States. On Monday, May 7th, 2018, United States Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that the Justice Department would begin prosecuting every person without documents who crossed into the United States along the southwest border. This policy shift specifically impacts migrants traveling with children. The zero tolerance measure has already split up thousands of families because children are not allowed to be allowed in adult criminal jails. Until the policy shift, most families apprehended crossing the border had been released to await civil deportation hearings rather than held for criminal prosecution. The children taken from their parents are being detained in concentration camps. Some of the children are caged in a chain-link cell with identification numbers on their chest. Others are living in tents in the Texas sun. Beloved people of goodwill, there are sacred obligations of ethics and conscience from which we cannot and should not be released. There are burdens of humanity which we must bear, or else we renounce the same humanity entirely. The protection of children is one such sacred obligation. As faith leaders, we, the undersigned, denounce and reject the current administration's policy of separating immigrating families and holding children in isolation from their adult support systems. We do not claim to speak for our denominations, individual organizations, or houses of worship, or faith traditions, but we cannot remain silent for the sake of our own hearts. The practice of separating migrant families who lack documentation must end immediately. There must never again be internment camps, concentration camps, or forced detention camps by any other name on American soil or under American control. Migrant children must be immediately returned to their parents or guardians. The current zero tolerance policy is ethically and morally unconscionable, and we seek an end to both the policy itself and its impact to the world. We invite you to join us in our journey toward justice. Respectfully. This was submitted by some 399 faith leaders in our country last week. We must begin our own zero tolerance movement. We can't just sit idly by and let our government do what it's doing. There's a sign in the Holocaust Museum in Washington that tells the early warning signs of fascism. Powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for human rights, identification of enemies as a unifying cause, supremacy of the military, controlled mass media, obsession with national security, religion and government intertwined, corporate power protected, labor power suppressed, disdain for intellectuals and the arts, obsession with crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption, and fraudulent elections. That's the display at the United States Holocaust Museum. This was the beginning signs of the workings of Nazi Germany era. It was the beginning of the Castro regime in Cuba. This was the beginning of many dictatorships in our world. This has been the beginning of the current administration of the United States of America. Powerful and continuing nationalism, we're pulling out of parts of the United Nations in the Human Rights Program. Disdain for human rights, women's health being ignored and cut. Religious freedom acts being passed in states to let people decide who has the rights. Identification of enemies as a unifying cause. Look at all the talk about the immigrants and the comparisons to MS-13 gang members. Not all immigrants are evil people. Supremacy of the military. Look at the ridiculous installment of Space Force. Increased spending in our government, in our military. Controlled mass media. We have that today. We can't see true pictures of what's going on in those camps or in those detention centers. We can only see what the government wishes to release in their press pictures. An obsession with national security, religion and government intertwined, corporate power protected. Just look at the destruction of the Environmental Protection Agency. Labor power suppressed through what they call trade policies. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts as they cut the funding for these programs. Obsession with crime and punishment, but only for those less fortunate. If you happen to have a friend in the media or a friend in the celebrity world, you can have justice. But if you're a common, everyday person, justice is not yours. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Look at the cabinet staff and our administration. Fraudulent elections. Do I really need to explain that to anybody? We as a people of faith and having standards of unity must not allow this mindset to continue to take hold in this country. We must be the ones to speak up now. We do not have the pleasure of time to figure out what our next move should be. If it were not for the radical actions of some brave souls in the past, we would never have had the works of knowledge of things like the Diary of Anne Frank. Those people made a decision at the spur of the moment to save the life of just one so that we could all learn from this great soul. The people who worked in the Underground Railways for those strong souls to escape slavery in our society. They did not seek their own comfort. They did not wait for just the opportune time to come along. They took action then and there. They picked their own zero tolerance policy and they went to work. We have waited so many times for others to come to our rescue or to fight for our cause. Today is the day that we must say enough is enough. I spent many hours this week in prayer, feeling sick and ashamed of our country. And I assume that many of you had those same feelings. But now is the time to turn those prayers and feelings into action. Get involved. We can find a way to make a difference. Work on a political campaign. Make calls to the current leadership in Washington. And if these things are things that you cannot do yourself, please encourage other people that they may know who are willing to do the work. We must continue to educate ourselves about what is really happening. The executive order signed by the leader of the current administration is not worth the paper it's written on. It means nothing, and it is not enforceable at all. That law was already settled by the Flores Act and settlement in 1997. We cannot afford to let our guard down, for all the signs of a fascist society have come into power with this current administration. If you feel that you have no business in dealing with this issue, then look at the faces of those children stripped away from their parents. Look at the faces of even the reporters having to report the headlines of the administration opening additional tender age detention centers. A tender age is from 1 day to 5 years old. This administration, even after the issuance of an executive order, has called on the Department of Defense to erect tent cities on military bases around our country. 20 to 40,000 additional beds. You do not need to spend a lot of time, talents, and funds to build these things if you do not intend to use them. Even if the policy does get changed of our current separation of children from their parents, then you still have to wonder who or what is the next group that will be housed in these inhumane tent cities. They're not building them just for fun. They're building them with an intent. And we must be a people of faith to stop it. Luke chapter 6, verses 20 through 22. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the son of the parent. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what their ancestors did to the prophets." For those who are being separated, for those poor children being separated, they're going to inherit the kingdom of God. They did nothing to deserve this. And we as a society have no right to be putting people through this. I want to end this morning with a prayer by Rabbi Paul Kipnis. Pray for the children, the ones who were taken away, and pray for the leaders whose moral compasses have gone astray. Pray for the kids who wallow in their cages, and pray for the guards whose work sullies their wages. Pray for the dads who are now childless and under arrest, and pray for the moms whose kids were ripped right from their breasts. Pray for the parents away from their children day and night. And pray for our government, which desperately needs to see the light. Pray for the religious, whose values others erroneously claim, to justify pulling children from their parents, but really they just profane God's name. Pray for the people who avert their eyes from this travesty, and pray for government which employs this immoral strategy. But mostly, pray for the children, and pray for all of us as we all suffer the wretched parts of this American dream. Amen.